The fascination with keeping exotic animals can be both thrilling and dangerous, offering a sense of mystery and adventure. However, this fascination comes with a harsh reality. Death can come swiftly and without warning. The most shocking incidents often take place in the least expected locations, such as one's own backyard. This was the tragic fate of Marius Els, a man who kept a hippo as his beloved pet, only to experience the catastrophic consequences of trusting a creature driven by untamed instincts. It was a dry, blistering day on the 400-acre farm tucked against the Vaal River in Free State, South Africa. The sun beat down relentlessly over the golden expanse of land, the grass swaying gently in the hot wind. The Vaal River, a lifeline in the otherwise arid land, trickled lazily along one edge of the property, offering a cool refuge to the creatures that called it home. Among them was Humphrey, a hippo that had been taken in at a young age after a river flood had left him stranded. Humphrey had been brought to the farm when he was just 5 months old, a helpless infant under the care of Marius Els, a 40-year-old former army major turned farmer. Marius had a history of caring for wild animals, giraffes, rhinos, but nothing could prepare him for the hulking mass that would one day become his greatest companion. The hippo was growing fast. By the time he reached maturity, he was a formidable creature, nearly 2,600 pounds of muscle, with enormous jaws capable of cracking bones with ease. But at the time, Humphrey was still an oversized infant, his innocent eyes following Marius wherever he went, his huge ears twitching at every sound. Marius, who had trained him to open his mouth for teeth brushing and even ridden him in the water, believed that the bond they shared was unbreakable. To Marius, Humphrey wasn't just a wild animal, he was family. The farm was located on the edge of civilization, far from the nearest city. The surrounding land was sparsely populated, and Marius was used to living alongside nature's unpredictability. The river provided for both the land and the animals, and Humphrey had free rein to roam the 400 acres, though Marius made sure the hippo had access to a dam that he had built for his own comfort. For the most part, Humphrey stayed in a large pond he had claimed as his own, where the water was deep enough for him to submerge and move freely. He only wandered when curiosity or mischief called him to explore the rest of the property. Marius thought of Humphrey as the gentle giant, a creature so tame that he would obey Marius's calls. On several occasions, he would make his way to the nearby golf course, where golfers were often startled by the sight of a huge, lumbering hippo. To Marius, these escapades were harmless fun, a playful show of a bond forged between man and beast. Yet each time Humphrey escaped his enclosure, the danger of the situation became more evident. One morning, as Marius tended to the animals, he noticed the hippo had wandered off again. This time, however, Humphrey had ventured out of the farm and down to the river, where he encountered a man and his young grandson paddling along in a canoe. Marius had seen the exchange from a distance, and knowing Humphrey's territorial nature, he rushed to intervene. Humphrey's instincts kicked in as soon as the hippo saw the canoe. Without warning, he charged into the water, moving fast, powerful ripples forming behind him as he cut through the river with frightening speed. The pair in the canoe barely had time to react. The man and his grandson scrambled for safety, climbing the nearest tree as Humphrey circled below, agitated and relentless. Marius reached the scene and, with the sound of his whistle, called the hippo back. Humphrey paused, shaking his head before trotting back to Marius's call. He had been trained, or so Marius believed, to listen and obey. The locals who had witnessed the scene were less convinced. They saw an animal capable of unpredictable aggression, one that had grown beyond the control of even the man who had raised him. Days passed and Humphrey's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began to kill livestock on neighboring farms and even threw Marius from his back when the hippo no longer wished to be ridden. What Marius once thought of as playful now seemed dangerous. But he continued to dismiss the warnings, too blinded by his affection for the animal. To him, Humphrey was still that innocent young hippo, the one he had raised from a vulnerable age. But Humphrey was no longer a baby. He was becoming an adult, and with adulthood came a growing sense of dominance. His instincts were sharpening, and Marius, though experienced with wild animals, failed to recognize the shift in the hippo's behavior. The once obedient pet was beginning to test his limits. The playful nudges, once affectionate, now carried weight. The bites, which had once been gentle, grew more forceful. On November 12, 2011, tragedy struck. It began like any other day, with Marius heading out to visit Humphrey. The hippo was waiting for him at the riverbank, eager as always for attention. As Marius approached, he offered the usual apple as a treat, but Humphrey seemed different. The usual excitement was there, but something darker had crept into the animal's gaze. Marius attempted to pass the hippo to go down to the water, but Humphrey blocked his path. The massive animal shook his head and grunted, a low, guttural sound that resonated through the air. Marius brushed it off, but as he attempted to step around the hippo, the situation escalated. Humphrey's large jaws opened wide, and for the first time, Marius felt a rush of unease. The hippo's teeth were exposed, the sight of them sending a shiver down Marius's spine. He recognized the signs of aggression, but it was too late. Humphrey lunged, his powerful bite sinking into Marius's torso. The immense pressure of the hippo's jaws shattered Marius's bones. He gasped in pain, but there was no escape. Humphrey came for him again and again, the animal's raw strength overwhelming his former caretaker. Marius's body was soon swept into the river, his life extinguished by the very animal he had raised and trusted. It was hours before his body was discovered submerged in the cold water. The bond that Marius had believed was unbreakable had been shattered. What he had failed to see was the ferocity growing within Humphrey, a force of nature that no amount of training could suppress. Humphrey, the hippo he had once seen as a son, had become something far more dangerous. A wild animal driven by instinct, and in that moment, he had betrayed the only person who had ever cared for him. Hippos, weighing up to 4,000 pounds, are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, responsible for more human deaths each year than lions. Marius had underestimated this reality, believing his bond with Humphrey could tame the beast. But what happens when the most unlikely predator in the food chain does the unexpected? For Paul MacDonald, what began as a harmless pet, a stag, would soon prove that even the most docile animals can pose dangers no one anticipates. It was just another ordinary Wednesday morning in Moo, a small community in northeast Victoria, Australia. Paul MacDonald, a 46-year-old farmer and loving husband, went outside to feed his pet deer, a cross between a red deer and an elk. He had owned the stag for 6 years, and the couple had always considered it a part of their family. The stag, standing almost 6 feet tall at the shoulder, had grown into a majestic creature under Paul's care. But what seemed like a routine task turned into a horrific tragedy. Paul's wife Mandy and their 17-year-old son Ethan heard a commotion coming from outside. As they rushed to investigate, they found Paul being viciously attacked by the animal he had raised and cared for. Mandy MacDonald couldn't believe her eyes as she saw her husband being thrown around by the stag. The once docile creature, now acting aggressively, was pouncing on Paul with its sharp hooves and antlers. Mandy's heart raced as she sprinted toward the scene, driven by both terror and determination. The stag's antlers, nearly 2 feet long, thrashed violently, aiming at Paul with each twist of its head. Paul struggled, trying to fend off the attack, but the deer was too powerful. Mandy, getting closer, saw Paul's body being tossed about as the stag pinned him to the ground. Despite the fear and chaos, Mandy's resolve only hardened. She couldn't stand idly by. With a burst of adrenaline, she screamed at the stag, trying to distract it. The animal's wild eyes shifted toward her for a moment. Its aggression diverted just long enough for Paul to regain his footing, but the moment was brief. The stag, now more enraged, turned its focus back to Mandy and charged. Mandy braced herself for the impact. The stag's hooves struck her legs, sending an unbearable pain shooting up her body. She felt its antlers graze her upper arm, tearing through her jacket. The force of the blows nearly knocked her off her feet, but she refused to retreat. Despite the sharp pain and the threat of being gored, she fought to remain standing. Just as Mandy's strength started to falter, she heard Ethan's footsteps behind her. He appeared with a large piece of timber, his eyes wide with determination. Ethan swung the wood with all his strength, striking the stag in the head. The stag staggered back, dazed. Ethan swung again, and the stag, now disoriented, backed away, retreating into the nearby trees. Mandy collapsed next to Paul, bruised and battered but alive. Ethan helped her to her feet, and they turned to Paul. His body lay motionless, a pool of blood forming beneath him. His injuries were severe, and Mandy knew deep down it was too late. She tried to call out to him, but the words stuck in her throat. The first responders arrived moments later. The officers approached cautiously, weapons drawn. The stag, now at a distance, stood with its head lowered in a threatening posture, its massive antlers still sharp and lethal. The officers could see the animal's bloodshot eyes and wild stance. They were aware of the heightened aggression associated with the mating season, which made the situation even more dangerous. The stag snorted angrily, stamping its hooves in warning. The officers exchanged tense glances before slowly advancing. They knew that any wrong move could lead to another deadly attack. As they neared Paul's body, the stag snorted again, its massive body shaking as it prepared to charge. With little choice, the officers raised their weapons. The sound of gunfire shattered the tense silence echoing across the valley. The stag collapsed instantly, its body crumpling to the ground. The officers rushed to Paul's side, but despite their best efforts, he was already gone. His injuries were too severe. The farmer, who had been a well-known figure in the community, was pronounced dead at the scene. Mandy, still in shock and badly injured, was transported to the hospital. Ethan stayed by her side, the weight of the tragedy settling heavily on his shoulders. The community of Moo was left in disbelief. Paul, who had devoted his life to his family and farm, was gone in an instant, taken by the very creature he had raised. The attack sparked a broader conversation about the dangers of domesticating wild animals. Experts noted that attacks by deer were rare, but they emphasized that the mating season could intensify aggression in stags due to higher testosterone levels. Steve Garlick, chairman of the Deer Management Committee at the Australian Deer Association, explained that while deer are generally more likely to flee than fight, the mating season can push them to act out violently if they feel threatened or provoked. Mandy and Ethan, still recovering from their physical and emotional wounds, were left to navigate a future without Paul. The loss was crushing. Yet they clung to the memories of a man who had shown them the true meaning of love, strength, and family. A heartfelt tribute was held for Paul, with friends and neighbors coming together to honor the kind and hardworking man they had tragically lost. But Paul was not the only one to fall victim to the dangers of trusting wild animals. For Peter Eads, the line between love and peril blurred when his once gentle kangaroo, raised from an orphaned joey, turned into a powerful and aggressive force he never saw coming. It was September 2022 in the quiet town of Redmond, Western Australia, a place where the hum of daily life was punctuated by the soft sounds of animals on Peter Eads' farm. Peter, 77, was well known for his devotion to his flock of 60 alpacas. He'd established the Agonis alpaca stud in 1997, and each of his animals had a name. The farm was his pride, a place where he tended to his creatures with care and attention. But one creature on his farm was different. An orphaned western gray kangaroo, raised by Peter after he found it abandoned as a joey. Australia is home to over 50 million kangaroos, and while these animals are rarely a threat, they possess powerful weapons to ward off any intruders. Kangaroos have sharp claws, strong teeth, and muscular back legs capable of delivering deadly blows. The western gray kangaroo, the species Peter raised, stands about 4 feet 3 inches tall when fully grown, weighing 120 pounds. Peter's kangaroo had reached maturity in the spring of 2022, and like all male kangaroos, the surge of testosterone during the breeding season had made it aggressive. For 3 years, the kangaroo had lived alongside Peter's alpacas. It had grown accustomed to his presence, to the gentle strokes Peter would give it when he visited the paddocks. But that day, everything changed. The kangaroo, now fully matured, was no longer the docile animal it once was. With testosterone surging through its body, its natural instincts took over. Peter entered the paddock to feed the alpacas, as he had done countless times before. He saw the kangaroo bounding toward him and, as usual, expected a peaceful exchange. But this time was different. The kangaroo didn't approach with the familiar calmness he had come to expect. Instead, it charged at him. Peter barely had time to react before the kangaroo lashed out. With powerful strikes from its front legs, the kangaroo's claws raked across Peter's skin. The force of the blow sent Peter staggering back, but the kangaroo wasn't finished. It leapt into the air, using its muscular tail to maintain balance. In one swift motion, it kicked Peter with its strong back legs. The impact sent Peter crashing to the ground, stunned and unable to defend himself. The kangaroo, now fully in control of the situation, continued its assault. Peter tried to rise, but each time he attempted to get to his feet, another kick from the kangaroo knocked him back down. Its blows were relentless, powerful enough to crush bones and fracture skulls. Peter's head was struck in repeatedly. Blood pooled beneath him as his vision blurred, and the pain became unbearable. It was a rare and terrifying event. Kangaroo attacks on humans were uncommon, but when they did happen, the results could be devastating. The last fatal attack from a kangaroo had occurred in 1936. This one would shock the town of Redmond. It wasn't until hours later that a member of his family called by. They couldn't reach Peter by phone and grew concerned. When they walked to the back of the house, they spotted Peter lying unconscious in the paddock, his body bloodied and unmoving. Terrified, they called emergency services. When paramedics arrived, they rushed to Peter's side, but the kangaroo stood between them and their patient. The animal, still full of aggression, lunged at the paramedics, blocking their path to Peter. Despite the urgency of the situation, the kangaroo refused to let them near. It was only when police arrived and shot the kangaroo that the paramedics could approach Peter. Peter had succumbed to his injuries. The delay, the brutal assault, had taken their toll. By the time they reached him, it was too late. His family and the town of Redmond were left in shock. Peter had always been kind to his animals, raising the kangaroo with love. But in the end, it was the kangaroo's instincts, not its training, that dictated the outcome. Peter had spent years caring for his animals, and the irony was not lost on those who knew him. He had once saved the joey, nursing it back to health, only to fall victim to the very creature he had raised. His kindness to his animals was well known in the community. Peter had always dreamed of being buried next to his favorite alpaca, a symbol of his dedication to the animals that had been his life. In the end, that dream came true. After his tragic death, his final resting place was beside the alpaca, as he had always wished, marking a quiet tribute to his lifelong bond with the creatures he cared for. Peter's death highlighted how easily nature can turn unpredictable, with even the most docile animals driven by instincts that can become lethal without warning. This lesson would soon be learned again by Joseph Austin Smith, who, on what was meant to be a routine hunting trip, would discover just how quickly a small mistake can lead to devastating consequences. It was January 21, 2023, when Joseph Austin Smith, A 32-year-old plumber from Wichita, Kansas, left for what was meant to be a routine hunting trip. Joseph was known for his infectious humor. At work, he could always be counted on to bring energy to the morning shift, filling the room with laughter at his jokes. He enjoyed the outdoors and had a passion for both hunting and playing the guitar. On that Saturday morning, he and his friend packed their gear, climbed into the pickup truck, and drove out into the rural countryside of Sumner County, Kansas. Kansas is well known for its hunting opportunities. The state boasts 300,000 acres of public land, along with over 1 million acres of private land open to hunters seasonally. Known as one of the top 3 states for pheasant and quail hunting, Kansas also attracts those pursuing deer, particularly in areas like G Springs, just north of the Oklahoma border. Joseph and his friend had set out that day with intentions to hunt doe, looking to make the most of the weekend. The area was wide open and quiet, an ideal place to hunt. The trip was uneventful at first. The 2 men chatted as the truck bounced over the rough roads. In the back seat, Joseph's friend's German Shepherd, a large, energetic dog, sat with its head out the window, looking out at the passing landscape. The dog was a familiar companion on their hunting trips, always tagging along, and Joseph knew it well. The truck rolled steadily along the tar roads, and the men began discussing the hunt, making plans for where they would set up when they reached their destination. But in their haste to leave, Joseph and his friend had made a critical mistake. They had carelessly thrown their equipment into the back of the truck, including a loaded hunting rifle. The rifle, while secured in the cab with them, was not properly handled. The safety was off, and the rifle was left in a position where the dog could easily interact with it. Without realizing it, the men had set the stage for a tragedy. As the truck rumbled along the dirt roads, the dog, restless in the back seat, shifted its position. It leaned against the rifle, its large paw pressing down on the trigger. The rifle, previously harmless, discharged with a loud crack that echoed through the cab of the truck. The sound was deafening, the shock of it immediate. The dog leapt backwards, startled by the blast. Its sudden movement caused the truck to swerve, and Joseph's friend slammed on the brakes. The pickup truck screeched to a halt. The air was thick with tension, the ringing in their ears the only sound after the shot. Joseph's friend turned to look at him, expecting him to respond to the noise, but instead found him slouched forward in the seat. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a reaction to the shock of the moment, but when Joseph didn't answer and blood began seeping through his shirt, his friend knew something was terribly wrong. In panic, he shook Joseph's body, calling his name over and over, but there was no response. With his heart racing, Joseph's friend grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The paramedics arrived within minutes, the sound of their sirens cutting through the still air. Blood poured from Joseph's abdomen, the bullet having passed through the back of his seat and struck him directly in the back, severing an artery. The bleeding was rapid and uncontrollable. Despite the paramedics' swift arrival and their desperate attempts at CPR, it was too late. Joseph had succumbed to his injuries right there, on the side of a rural road, with his friend and the dog the only witnesses to the tragedy. The shock of the event rippled through the community. Joseph, the vibrant and always cheerful man, was gone. The dog, though a familiar companion on many trips, had not been harmed. The investigation that followed painted a tragic picture of a preventable accident. Sumner County sheriffs determined that Joseph's friend was innocent, having made no mistakes other than perhaps in not realizing the danger of leaving a loaded rifle in the cab. The firearm had gone off due to the dog's paw pressing on the trigger, a simple yet fatal mistake. A similar incident had occurred years earlier in Turkey, where a man's dog had stepped on the trigger and shot him dead. It was a stark reminder of the potential danger that such seemingly innocent actions could bring. Kansas's Wellington Fire and EMS Chief Tim Hay, speaking to the press, offered advice in response to the incident. Keep the safety on, unload your guns completely when it's in a vehicle, and put it away in the trunk," he said. His words were a call to action for all hunters, underscoring the importance of responsible firearm handling. Joseph's friend, who had witnessed it all, would carry the weight of that tragic day with him forever. A small mistake, a loaded rifle, and a shifted dog had combined in an instant to change everything. The sorrow of losing someone so full of life was compounded by the knowledge that it could have been prevented, a fact that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the quiet moments after the sirens faded and the investigation concluded, Joseph's legacy lived on through the stories told by those who knew him. His laughter, his energy, and his presence would be missed by all who had the privilege of knowing him. The dog would continue to roam the countryside, but the bond between it and the men who had once shared so many adventures would never be the same. What was meant to be an ordinary hunting trip ended in the kind of tragedy that could have been avoided with simple precautions. Thank you for joining us as we explored the unsettling world of pets that became predators. These chilling events serve as a reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. But don't go just yet. There's one more story you need to hear. It begins with Norman Buala, a man whose dangerous obsession with exotic animals led him to keep a 650-pound Siberian tiger as his prized pet. He thrived on the thrill of raising these wild creatures, but when a simple mistake shattered his sense of control, the consequences were horrifying. A moment of trust, a deadly misstep, and a fate no one could have predicted. What happened next will leave you speechless. Click to watch the full story.